think this speaks beautifully about some of the things that I'm going to talk about today, but also just in follow up to the conversation we were having last week about how the body keeps score, the importance of frequency and energy and cymatics in the body, and how, for me, and one of the reasons why I've created Sovereign Wealth, why I speak about it so passionately, a major part of the Sovereign Wealth Keys, which is the first book that I wrote, which is ultimately kind of a dictionary and lexicon of all of the terms and structural um, conditions that I talk about here. It's because language is what shapes us, it's what shapes our operating system. Language being the thoughts that we think, the words that we speak, and how they direct our actions. And the frequency of that, the cymatics, the effect of sound on matter, is really, really important. And it absolutely shapes how we move through this world. And so I'm always going to keep coming back to that because I do think it's so important. Um, and I think it showed itself in the conversation that I've been having over the weekend, and specifically the conversation that I had yesterday on the radio. And so, if you're new here, I live in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. I have become unusually engaged in municipal politics and really paying attention to the inner workings and the mechanisms um, of what happens in municipalities and our smallest forms of government. And the reason I think I'm so fascinated by it is because they are party agnostic, right? You are one of one when you're a councillor, and you are representing the smallest subsets of people when we look at the face of a nation. And when we look at the mechanics and the operations of a province is made up of several municipalities, several governing bodies. And what I've been noticing significantly over the past few years, it's been happening for a long time, but what I've really been noticing over the past few years is how municipalities are consistently ceding and abdicating their governing authority and jurisdiction over to administrative bodies, bureaucrats, unelected officials, both at the municipal level and at the provincial level. Because in the province of Nova Scotia, our municipalities, they kind of fall, from what I understand. Again, this is, and I should also point, everything here is my opinion and it's my take and my interpretation of what I'm seeing. And my goal is always to be more curious than I am certain and to really start to ask the questions that no one else is asking, because it's there's so many things that just don't make sense to me from a practical and structural level. And I'm seeing a lot of conflation of emotions overriding logic because we don't understand how to move and stored emotions in the body. And it seems to be hijacking our operating system, and we're no longer thinking critically, moving logically, asking the questions that need to get asked for a myriad of reasons. That's why I thought the Daily Sovereign passage was so interesting for today. But when I look at what's happening, so in Nova Scotia, like all of the municipalities fall under what's known as the Municipal Government Act, and that is held inside of the portfolio of the Minister of Municipal Affairs at the provincial level. And I'm really paying attention to how municipalities keep offloading their responsibilities to their administrative offices, and how through that offloading, they've lost their governing capacity. They're no longer um, functioning in the way it appears they should be, which is to represent the constituencies, um, to represent the constituencies and the best interest of those constituencies, not to be confused with constituents as a person. I think we have to be very careful about that. One of my biggest criticisms when it comes to government is that people say, you work for us. It's like, no, they kind of don't. And at a municipal level, to me, and again, I am so open to being wrong about all of this, but as I dig deeper and look, um, I've spoken with counselors who have said we're technically not employees of the municipality. We are elected, we are one of one, we are independent, but we're also not employees of where I live, the Halifax Regional Municipality. We're not actually employees there, which when I hear that, I'm like, oh, you're a trustee, right? Because it's a corporate trust structure. You have the executor, the trustee, and the beneficiary. And we believe that administration, the municipality is the executor, that the councilors are the trustees, and that we are the beneficiaries, but we're not. The municipality, the corporation is the beneficiary. The trustees are there to oversee what's happening. But the ultimate beneficiary of this trust structure are not the people, it's the corporation. Because when you have trust structure, trust triangle, where you have your executor here, trustee, beneficiary, your trustee cannot be the executor or the beneficiary, but your executor can also be the beneficiary. And these are like the hidden, unseen things that we don't see. And so when we start engaging our municipal politics and politics at every level, just things don't make sense, right? But I'm very well aware that the people that we are electing are trustees. Um, but we always have to be mindful of who they're actually working for the benefit of. And so at the municipal level, we have our elected council, and then we have the administration. And the administration is made up of all of your city staff, your planning departments, there's finance, audit. But at the executive level, you have your CAO, and then you have your auditor. And to the best of my understanding, in the Halifax Regional Municipality, the CAO and the auditor are the two employees that are hired by council. And we had a CAO, Kathy O'Toole, who resigned, gosh, I think over a year ago now. And there's been an interim CAO acting in place until the new one was hired. And the new one has just been hired. And her name is Marnie Klupe, and she is currently the CAO, city manager, for the city of Hamilton, Ontario. And it was released on Friday last week, so July 3rd, that she was going to be coming to Halifax for approximately the next 5 years. Our CAO terms are usually 5-year contracts. The last one only made it halfway through. She left. I thought she left and went somewhere interesting, and she did. She ended up going to our regional municipal water corporation, which that's a story for another day. But when I saw that they hired Marnie Clucky, whatever we want to call, I keep hearing different names. When they hired, we're just going to call her for now. When they hired her, the first alarm bell that I had is, why are you hiring outside of the HRM? Why are you hiring outside of Nova Scotia? And I had that question because we just went through a process where our chief of fire was hired from outside of the province. And I'm like, there is no way that we don't have qualified candidates here for this position. There's no way. It's impossible. And I likened it to my experience in offshore jurisdictions. And what I found so interesting is when you're applying to an offshore jurisdiction, Cayman Islands, for example, in order for a company in the Cayman Islands to hire someone not from the island, they have to put their job postings online. They have to do a full candidate search, and then they have to qualify with the immigration department as to why someone who's already on the island and someone who's local is not qualified for that job. In my experience and the conversations that I've heard and the things that I've seen, typically when that happens, the decision has already been made internally as to who they're going to hire. And the decision has already been made that they're not going to be hiring someone from on the island. And what I noticed once I got there was that the sentiment was that the locals weren't qualified. And then when I looked around and I really took a hard look at what was happening, I saw very clearly that not only were the locals not being hired because they were routinely being told they weren't qualified, there was no pathway for qualification. There was really no way for a local Canadian to become qualified in the prominent financial sector on that island. Not if you weren't leaving the island, going to the mainland, into the US, or going abroad to get a higher level education to be able to come back and enter the um, the workforce that so many expats are dominating. And I always thought that was really interesting because this is like one of the wealthiest islands in the world. It's not like they don't have the ability to build the schools or the training structures, have the education to be able to offer those pathways. But they don't exist. And it becomes really icky if you have any semblance of a conscience and understanding what's happening there when you know that you are taking opportunity away from someone in their home. And so I was first kind of taken aback that this is the second major hire that they've done. And I've noticed this in terms of bureaucratic roles across the province and different places where people are routinely being brought in from other cities. And it's always using the excuse, we don't have the talent here. And I don't accept that. I don't accept that. We have significant talent here. I think sometimes it's better bringing in a stranger who doesn't understand the inner workings of what's happening than it is to bring someone in who may challenge what's happening. So with Marnie Kluge, with the CAO that's coming, I had some questions about that. I wanted to know because right now we have some significant issues in the HRM, and they're now looking at hiring a city manager from a city in Ontario who hasn't had to live and experience the decisions and consequences that have been coming out of city council for a number of years, right? They're not experiencing the effects of the administrative decisions and the council decisions that have been shaping the HRM. Not only that, it's reasonable to assume that after her 5-year term is over, that she's just not going to stay here to also live the consequences of the decisions that are made during her tenure. So you have someone coming in and out. That was my first criticism. But then I started to do some research, and I was absolutely gobsmacked at what I found. And what became very apparent for me very quickly in doing some research is that the city of Hamilton has had some problems. And I think most people in Canada are aware of that. Hamilton tends to be, because it's a border city, it's had a lot of national attention, we can say. It is a jurisdiction that gets a lot of heat, has had a lot of eyes on it, has had questionable leadership. There were four things that really stood out for me when it came to this particular candidate. One, in the city of Hamilton, she was hired by the mayor through super mayor powers, which means unlike here where they went through a committee board and council had a vote and they were brought in on that basis, up there the mayor got to go, I'm hiring you. So there was a lot of obscurity in her hiring. Second is that the city of Hamilton, and I'm going to pull up the date so I have this correct, February 24th of 2024, the city of Hamilton experienced the most severe cybersecurity failure in Canadian municipal history. And the event took nearly every city of Hamilton system offline. And nearly 30 months later, now, the city of Hamilton is still trying to restore its operations, some of its operations. It's not fully back online. And not only is the city of Hamilton not fully back online, the city financial system hasn't been restored. And because the city financial system hasn't been restored, there hasn't been a financial audit on the city of Hamilton since 2022. And because of that, the city's credit rating was downgraded, and S&P is saying, we're probably going to downgrade you again. The third concern had to do with the fact that there was a controversy around a shelter project in the city of Hamilton where there was a directive to expand emergency shelters. And it resulted in a non-competitive single-sourced contract going out for $1.4 million to a company called Micro Shelters Inc. And it was for 40 made in China tiny shelters. And the project was awarded to a newly incorporated company that had absolutely no corporate history. There didn't appear to be sufficient records in the past. And the final cost for the project, it was awarded at 1.4, it expanded to 2.8, and eventually finished at 7.9 million. And then the fourth issue that I have is the fact that through other audit reports on the procurement process, this CAO, Marnie Kluge, has admitted that there were governance failures, rules weren't followed, and we should probably do better. The other thing, so maybe it's 5 things that I noticed, is what comes up with her name a lot is culture change. And anyone who has worked in change management at a global level or even at a regional level understands that when change management or when culture changes are happening, it's because significant upheaval is about to happen inside of an organization. And the corporate term for like culture change is usually like there's a hatchet man coming in. There's someone coming in to clean house. And it's when you see people get packaged out early for retirement, you start to see roles significantly change. You see significant changes in executive leadership, and that's exactly what happened in the city of Hamilton. From what I can find, it appears when we're looking at like the executive roles in the city of Hamilton, the only person still standing is the CFO. Everything else is kind of gone. And this happened during a time where they were reeling from one of the largest cybersecurity failures in Canadian municipal history, which, you know, reasonably you may want to clean house, right? If there were some serious accountability issue, I get that, right? But also it means a lot of your institutional knowledge is gone as well. The people who would have understood the systems are gone. There's pros and cons to cleaning house. There's pros and cons to cleaning house, especially at a time where a lot of your reporting systems are offline and things can't be tracked appropriately and therefore audited appropriately. And so, considering we live in Nova Scotia, and a year and a half ago, Nova Scotians were alerted to a massive cybersecurity issue, an attack that happened with Nova Scotia Power, our monopolized power utility. We're a little sensitive here. Excuse me. We're a little sensitive here when it comes to cybersecurity. So that alone just feels a little tone deaf. But I wanted to understand. I wanted to understand how this decision was made. And over the weekend, I was taking to social media and I was asking questions on the HRM Instagram account related to the post where they were welcoming her in. Like, I wanted to understand why they hired outside of the city. I want to understand, you know, the very Googleable and easy to find financial controversies surrounding the CAO in a city that just had a capital budget audit that showed that our council mismanaged $380 million, that there's no way for the auditor to track how and why $380 million were spent. We have a mayor that is under investigation by the RCMP because he didn't follow procurement laws and that he didn't submit his expenses appropriately. Like, I want to understand why, at this particular time, council thought it was a good idea to hire not only a CAO from another province, but a CAO that was in charge during the largest cybersecurity hack in Canadian municipal history, the most severe, and who is also shrouded in scandal around procurement, not following governance, and some, I can't even say financial mismanagement because we can't get an audit report because the finance systems are down. How do you hire a city manager for whom you cannot measure the most important metric, which is how they financially managed a city and a municipality? I had so many questions. So on Mondays on 95.7 FM, our local call-in radio show, the counselors, two counselors show up every week to sit down and have a conversation. They take calls from the public. I am very active on that particular segment because it's not often, and I think I've heard them say it's the only show across Canada where you can actually engage with your elected officials live on air. So yesterday we had our deputy mayor, Patty Cuddle, was on, and our longest tenured counselor, David Hensby, at 22 and a half years, which is a whole other issue, were on. And I wanted to know how they came to the determination that this particular candidate was the best for the job based on these facts that I've already found, which are not hiding that deep on the internet. And the response was absolutely astounding. Not surprising, but still astounding at the same time. And it came down to the fact that they hired a recruitment firm, an executive talent manager, to go find candidates. We don't know much more beyond that process because it's a private process. And this is where the big issue comes in. And these are the arguments I was kind of having. I shouldn't say arguments, the comments I was fielding online all weekend, which was, oh, well, we need fresh blood. We need people coming in who can bring fresh ideas. I'm sorry, I reject that. There are plenty of people who have left this province, gained experience elsewhere, seen other systems, worked in other jurisdictions, who have come back here to put that talent and expertise to use. There's a pool here to draw from. Other people saying, because I was questioning the transparency of the situation, because how in the hell can we expect transparency and accountability inside of a system that's shrouded in secrecy and privacy? We can't. Why there's no transparency around this system and why we cannot see concretely which candidates were shortlisted, what their resumes were, and why they weren't selected. And they keep citing HR privacy. And people were defending that. They were like, well, if I was applying for a job, I wouldn't want my employer to know. And this is where I think we need to touch grass, kick rocks, and take a step back. Because how do we hire people in positions of public trust, people who are responsible for the administration of a municipality, and ensure we're getting the best candidate for the job when there's zero disclosure around the process? I think that is a fundamental flaw in our governance and in our processes. Because if you are going to be putting your name in for a position like that, it should be no different than an elected official where everybody knows that you're doing it. And if you don't want anyone to know that you're doing it, perhaps you are not the best candidate for the job. And it was so ironic because someone in one of the comments on Instagram said, well, they just did it with the Nova Scotia Health Authority. And maybe not recently, but it's, they hired the CEO for the Nova Scotia Health Authority, and that's private. We don't get to see which candidates they are. Again, we had an audit report come out, 2-3 months ago from the Auditor General, illuminating the fact that the Nova Scotia Health Authority spent 3.8 billion with a B dollars outside of procurement guidelines. And this would have been under the management of someone who was hired inside of the same system. We have serious, serious, serious procurement issues right across the board at the municipal level, at the provincial level, at the federal level, and it's because decisions are being made by unelected, appointed bureaucrats inside of these systems that are highly opaque, that there's no transparency because HR policy says we can't release it. We have to do better. And my argument is always, just because we've always done it this way, just because we are not willing to question and be curious as to why these examples exist, because if we were in that position of looking for a new job, we might not want our boss to know that we're looking for a new job, because heaven forbid we tell someone we're unhappy. Heaven forbid we have grown up conversations about the state of what we're actually dealing with. Heaven forbid we have to step outside of our emotions for one moment and have a logical, constructive conversation like an adult. Like, these are the capacities. These are the inherent capacities that as individuals we are lacking, which is preventing us from being curious, asking the questions, and operating through emotion and belief instead of structure and executive record. So when I was on the radio yesterday, the counselors wanted to offload and subrogate all of their accountability and responsibility onto the people that brought them the candidates. They couldn't answer questions about the executive record. Bruce Hensby, 22 and a half years on council, said, well, I wasn't part of the executive standing committee that did the interviews, because apparently we had an executive standing committee that interviewed the candidates, and then they brought the short list to council and council made the vote. And he's like, but I think that we got the right candidate, and based on what everybody said, I think it's the right one. He couldn't ground anything in logic, nor could he take responsibility for his vote and why he made it. He kept trying to offload that onto everyone and everything else for why he made the decision that he made. It's a problem. It's a huge problem. And I think what I find so appalling, I think, about this whole situation is that when we're looking at our council, and I said this to them yesterday, I don't trust your judgment. I think we have a judgment issue, and you sitting there as elected officials who only got in with 34% of the population vote. And I know I've said a couple times that the mayor got in with 34,000 votes. I'm going to retract that right now. He actually got in with 54,000, but the total municipal election in 2024 in this province only had 34% of the population show up. And I made it very clear to Nova Scotians on that call that that's our fault, that we have the council that we have right now because we chose not to participate. But because they only got in with 34% of the population vote, make no mistake, they're not speaking for the people. Let's not confuse the fact that just because they were elected that they're actually speaking for the people. But given the issues with the capital budget audit, that they couldn't manage appropriately $380 million, that we have a mayor that's under investigation for not following procurement and expense rules, that they, for all intents and purposes, then just decided to hire a CAO shrouded in the same controversy. There's a judgment issue. and them sitting there saying, take our word for it that we just hired the best candidate for the job, when her executive record, what she has demonstrably shown, she has already done. And also what they cannot show she has done, because the financial reporting systems are not back online. We don't know how long they're going to be online. We don't know how long it's going to take auditors to sort through what she actually did and accomplished. How can you sit there and tell me that you've just hired the best person for the job based on these metrics alone? That's going to be a high bar now, a very high bar for you to handle. And the wheels came off the bus. Like, their response was absolutely, I'm going to post the link in the show notes. Like, look in the show notes for a link. I'm going to put a clip on, I have a running article on my Substack called Hear Something, Say Something. And it's where I put all of my clips when I call into the radio, so that you can hear that I'm not just sitting here saying, these are my opinions and believe me. I want you to hear these conversations that I'm having live in public on a regular basis, how I'm choosing to exercise my free will, how I'm choosing to exercise my sovereignty, how I'm choosing to be more curious than I am certain, and how I'm choosing to expand the conversation by looking for a greater perspective. I'm going to post the link to yesterday's conversation in the show notes so that you can hear the total and utter ridiculousness of the response of the deputy mayor and the longest tenured councillor. And then you tell me if they have the capacity to make an appropriate judgment call on this new CAO. All signs point to no. All signs point to no. It was an absolute shit show. So then after I get off, a few other people call in, including Gloria McCluskey, who is, God love her, 95, 96 years old at this point. She was the former mayor of Dartmouth pre-amalgamation. She was in politics for a while, for 23 years. She saw the transition through uh, the amalgamation. She was the mayor of Dartmouth when that happened. Um, and which, by the way, if you're not familiar with the amalgamation of the HRM in 1996, it is documented as like one of the largest failed amalgamations in Canadian history as well. So now we have the largest failed amalgamation about to be administrated by a CAO who just facilitated the most severe cybersecurity attack in Canadian municipal history. Like, it's not good. We're underwater here. We have a problem. And she called in, and I appreciate what she said. And she's like, we need to thank Nicole for doing the research that she did this weekend and bringing us information that we, the public, might not otherwise have received. And that, maybe we need to consider rescinding the offer to this CAO, because what I uncovered and what I released was that severe and serious. And when you hear the response of the counselors, you will be left wondering if they knew what I released about the procurement issues, about the depth of the cybersecurity, about the fact that the financial reporting systems are not online, so we can't even evaluate her. We can't even evaluate her conduct and her efficacy as a CAO. It's just impossible. It's impossible. There's not enough data for them to concretely say this was the best person for the job. And then again, they offloaded all the responsibility for this decision onto their talent recruiter, which they didn't disclose who that was. Another caller came in and indicated that it could be Knightsbridge, Robinson Surrett. I don't know. I don't know who it was, but I do know that they were very quick to pass the hot potato on why this candidate was shortlisted and why they ultimately selected her. And they wanted to rely on emotion. Oh, but she's so lovely and it's how she handled everything. I'm sorry, 30 months later, after a cybersecurity event, when the majority of your reporting systems are still not online, your financial systems are still completely offline, you cleaned out your entire executive except for your CFO, and you have no data to back up your competency, and you want us to trust that that's the best candidate for the job? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And that's the response of someone I would expect. I would expect a response like that from someone who doesn't want to be scrutinized in the same way, right? That's why I said what I saw in the audit reports and from the digging that I did into the city of Hamilton versus the capital budget issues and the investigations that are happening here. They're the same. They look identical. They hired what they know. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem. And at the end of the day, it's our fault because we didn't participate properly in the last election and we got what we deserved. Full stop. We have what we deserve. We have the council we deserve right now, which is why I want to move forward in October with launching the platform around how we increase voter participation. And if I learned anything from yesterday, where there were several callers saying, this wasn't counselor on the hot seat, this was counselors on the barbecue. And I hope to see Nicole on the 28 ballot. If you're watching, Nicole's not going to be on the 28 ballot. Bruce Hensby or David Hensby, whatever your name is, counselor that's been there for far too long, his closing remark to me in the comments was, well, I expect to see Nicole's name on the 2028 ballot. No, you will never see my name on a ballot. You will never see my name on a ballot because I am not going to participate inside of that kind of system that operates so opaquely, where there's no transparency, no accountability, and I'm going to be gagged by that. I'm not going to do it. And I was trying to explain this to someone yesterday where I said, when we look at like provincial politics, federal politics, where there's parties, right? You have like the Liberal Party, the NDP, the PC, the Green, the People's Party, which I hate that name because that's not what it is. And Maxime Bernier is his own special kind of problem. But what we don't have is like a participation party. We don't have any organizing forces for the fourth, fifth party, which is the people that are voting. We don't understand how to participate. We don't understand what our civic function is. And I'm more focused on that. I would much rather put my time, attention, and energy into creating like the participation party, which is really just the structure and the framework to allow people to exercise their free will in a way that actually makes sense. I'm not here to tell you who to vote for. I'm not here to put up a campaign. I'm not here to try and psychologically brainwash you into what I want you to believe. I want you to be able to see the story inside of the story. I want you to be able to see the structure and analyze it appropriately. I want you to be able to operate not from emotion. So many people yesterday were like, well, we should just give her a chance. We need to let her get here and see what she can do. Are you fucking kidding me? Why would we do that? That's like handing your money over to someone that you know already ran a Ponzi scheme and went, well, maybe we should just see what he can do. No! That is the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Excuse my language. Like, we're flying today. That is the dumbest shit I've ever heard. That is people making decisions off of emotion and not looking at executive record. I'm not trying to condemn this woman as a person. I don't know her. I've never met her. All I have to go off of is her executive record. And her executive record doesn't pass the sniff test. At a very fundamental level, it doesn't pass the sniff test. Why? And this is why it's like, it's so funny when you look back at people. This is why I've created what I've created, because we run on potential instead of capacity. And her capacity shows us, I'm not giving you a pass on potential. I'm not giving you a pass on potential. And seeing what I've seen in the private sector and being where I've been, my mentor who brought me offshore, who taught me what I know, absolutely more than capable of being a city manager. And the reason she is more than capable is because she's been brought into the positions and places that she's been because she oversaw IT systems, she oversaw finance systems, she oversaw operations and finance systems, and took that shit seriously. Cybersecurity hacks were not happening on her watch. Overspending and budget issues were not happening on her watch. She took it seriously and she made the appropriate changes. And those people exist all over the private sector. But what you're not going to do is take someone who's already making, I don't know, $600,000 a year plus bonus, probably factoring close to $1 million a year. And I say that because when I was offshore, we had lawyers that were cashing bonuses of in excess of $20 million a year, which was wild, wild. But that's how the private sector operates. And the reason the private sector operates that way is because they can make the money that they're making because they have the systems and people in place that they do to ensure stuff like that doesn't happen, to make sure they are locked vaults and that they are operating with the highest efficiencies and the highest securities. You're not going to hire someone like that for $350,000. So we already have to set the bar lower at that point because someone is not going to take half a pay cut or more to go step into that position. That's one of the issues that we have. But to sit here and tell me that the talent doesn't exist, if you've never walked into an offshore legal fund and fiduciary firm and watched how that's run, they're dealing with budgets and bottom lines and clients that are worth far more than a municipality. And they're not having these issues because they have the forethought and the foresight and the governance to stay ahead of it. And they also have the common sense to not hire people on the idea that, oh, maybe they won't do it again. You don't give someone they would never hire someone that has that kind of executive record to come in and maybe not fuck up their company. They're not going to do that. I don't understand. I don't understand the decision making that was made in this whole thing, which is why I lit it on fire yesterday. And I'm going to call back today and I'm going to qualify some of the things that I said and try and broaden this conversation around this privacy issue that they're holding on to around why we can't talk about the candidates that apparently weren't qualified because it's an HR policy privacy issue. Because right now I do not buy that you just hired the best person for the job. And you're going to have to prove it. And if you can't prove it, then I'm going to assume that you can't, right? That you didn't do it. And so we have a problem. We have a problem just generally, individually. And this is where I'm going to jump out of the municipal issues and into my work. We have an issue right now where people do not have the internal compass, the internal structures, the internal capacities required to not allow their emotions to hijack their entire processing system, right? Because when I have people repeatedly saying, well, we just need to give her a chance, or accusing me of condemning her or speaking ill of her, I'm not. I've never said anything about this woman as a person. I have only been highly critical of her executive record, which she has already demonstrably shown us, and the things she can't. That is what we have to examine. We have to be able to separate the behavior and the habit, like the behavior of someone from them as a person. I think that's really, really important because if I've learned anything over my life, people have deep wells and capacities for change and for growth. It's absolutely possible. And it's what I wish for humanity. But we cannot continue to allow people to continually deceive us with their words when their actions are showing us so clearly what their capacity is. We have to stop getting romanced by language and charisma. It's highly problematic. And not just in these executive roles inside of our governments, within ourselves and how we're choosing to show up and occupy our life, in our relationships, with our families, with our friends, with our businesses, our jobs, our communities. It is a ripple effect. And this is where deep nervous system work and emotional processing cannot be understated and undervalued. And it's also an individual's responsibility to do that. Because when you allow anyone who's ever had, panic attacks are pretty severe. But if you've ever had issues with anxiety, if you've ever had a panic attack, if you've ever had your fight flight kick in, where you cannot regulate yourself in the moment and stay inside of a hard conversation, you understand what it means to have your emotional system hijack your decision making. You can't make clear decisions. You can't make rational decisions. There's a lot of collateral damage that can happen inside of that activation, if you will. And I hold great compassion for it. I've gone through hell and back trying to figure out how to not allow overwhelming emotions to continually run my life. And we're into like a decade of work at this point, and it never ends. It never stops, because new levels, new devils. Just when you think everything's good, it pops up again, and we have a problem. But I think we don't pay enough attention to the individual structures that we operate through every day, right? We don't realize that we don't govern ourselves with a specific set of laws, if you will, right? If we want to mirror this to politics and government and municipalities, and I like doing this because it's something people understand outside of them. We don't seem to have these laws and rules that we govern our life with. So at the beginning of this, I said that I spent yesterday at a friend's place and just helping him paint his decks, because quite frankly, after I dropped that nuke on the radio, I just needed to not be anywhere near a computer. I needed to not be near a computer. I needed to be in my body, and I needed to be doing something mindless that turned my brain off. And so I went to go help him, and it was such a beautiful day. We had so much fun, but he'd never done anything like that before. And it was really fun to watch him kind of go like hesitate on how to get started, but then once understanding the system and the process, he just locked the fuck in, and we got 2 decks done. And it was great. It was so fantastic, and it showed me something really important, and it reinforced something for me in the work that I do, which is when you lack structure, when you don't understand the rules in front of you and the parameters that you're supposed to be operating within, shit goes haywire, right? You end up in analysis paralysis, you end up looping on things. And it's so interesting because, in professional capacities, and this was something that he said to me, because I was like, you make serious decisions every day, like very, very serious, high risk decisions every day. And you do it no problem. And so it was so interesting to just kind of watch this painting process unfold. And he was like, well, Nicole, he was like, I work inside of a very defined set of laws and rules and regulations, and I know them inside and out, so that my executive functions kick in when something's happening in front of me. I know what to do with it, and I know what to do with it immediately. And so it just reinforced the fact to me that, like, when we're carrying things and we don't know why, when our invisible backpack is full of things that we don't know if it's ours, we don't know why we're holding it, we don't know who it actually belongs to, we don't know if it fits inside of our value structure and our ethics and our integrity, it clouds our judgment. And that's where the emotional processing kicks in. And it actually can really create some serious issues in our life. And so it was so interesting to me because as we're having this conversation, I can see my wheel. Like I can see this sovereign wealth wheel and the 9 fields. I can see this wheel operating in my head in terms of a capacity compass, like this compass of capacity. I can see where um, capacity is overflowing and where capacity might be under functioning, and how just a little rebalance of a few of these things and knowing where to take things out of your invisible backpack and what buckets to put it in to know, is this emotional, is it physical, is this part of my creativity, is it a result of my environment? Like when we can just bucket things, we can begin to make better decisions because now we're starting to put structure on our life. We are surrounded by structure everywhere, but we usually lack structure in our own individual lives. And it was just a beautiful day. We had so much fun. And it was just really eye-opening to me to kind of move through that process um, with someone, and to have something accomplished at the end of the day that may have otherwise taken longer to get done. And it really felt reflective of what I witnessed on the radio earlier that day with these counselors that were making decisions that were out of their depth and making very important decisions where they are clearly out of their depth. And they did exactly what I have been stating they are doing 100% of the time, which is abdicating their personal accountability and responsibility and governing function to other people. They were very quick to say, well, it's the standing committee, not just council. Oh, it was an external headhunter. It was like, for God's sake, if I figured it out over the weekend, reading a few audit reports on the internet, and you had months to make this decision, and not only months to make this decision, but to also interview the candidates, I don't accept your response right now. All I am seeing you do is say, please don't hold me accountable for the decision I just made. It wasn't me. It's like you just got that Shaggy song playing in your head now, right? You're welcome for the earworm. It wasn't me. And that's a problem. These are not the people that should be in these positions. If you're not capable of taking accountability and responsibility for the decisions that you make and standing on business and standing on the decisions and the reasons why you made those decisions, please leave. Please leave. And again, this is also our responsibility as citizens for not participating as the alternate candidate, right? What if we thought about ourselves as the alternate candidate? Because we have to be engaged. We have to be holding them accountable. We have to be sending emails. We have to be showing up at public meetings. We have to be having these conversations out in the open. But we don't treat ourselves as part of the process. We don't treat ourselves as like the alternate party. We don't treat ourselves as part of the function of democracy, but scream that democracy is our birthright. I don't get it. I don't get, and maybe I'm out to lunch. Like I said at the beginning, these are all just my opinions. This is based on what I'm finding. I am more than okay with being wrong. I'm okay with being wrong. I can hold the capacity to have these conversations. At the end of the day, I want to be more curious than I am certain. I want to be more curious than I am certain, because the moment we become so certain of something, we end up inside of a belief structure that starts to leave little room for nuance and additional curiosity. And that is the death knell 100% of the time in every situation that we're in. And we have to be okay with releasing things. And I think something I'm going to talk about in another episode is death, and our response to death and how we deal with death. And not just in the physical mortality sense of the individual, but in the sense of when something no longer serves you and you need to let it go, why we don't. why we can't let go of beliefs, why we can't let go of habits, why we can't let go of patterns, why we can't let go of people, why we can't let go of um, jobs, friendships, relationship, like why we can't do that. That was something that was very prominent for me during the pandemic, where I did a lot of shedding, experienced a lot of death, a lot of death, um, because I had to be more willing to release my grip on something and let it do what it was going to do, because I'm choosing to look at the record that it is showing me instead of what I feel about it. These are really important things that we have to start separating, because we've become so invested in emotion and running on emotion that it has become incredibly detrimental. And when people are listening to me speak and never once ever hearing me, never once am I ever using the words where I'm condemning a specific person, I'm speaking specifically about their pattern, their record, and their behavior. And all people can hear me say is, that's a bad person. She's saying it's a bad person. She's condemning the person. That tells me something. That's data. That's information. And that's important. And it's worthy of a deeper conversation. And I think it's a really important conversation that we need to have. Because when we cannot talk about behaviors and patterns because people internalize it emotionally and they short circuit and shut down, like that's important. That that's important, because you can't scream into a fragmenting system and expect them to hear you either, right? That there's it's so much to unpack. There's so much to unpack with how we communicate. It's why language, for me, is what shapes your operating system, the operating code that your body runs on. Because your language is something that you um, you're born with a specific language epigenetically, right? The language of your body is speaking to you the moment you're conceived through your DNA and your cellular response. There's already feedback happening between you, your cells, your mother, the life that she's living, the life that your grandmother lived. Like epigenetics is wild. And so there's always this feedback mechanism happening through language and the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves about the world, who we are, our participation in it, and the stories that we're constantly being told. There's a reason propaganda is propaganda. There's a reason we are influenced, not only through the words that we're constantly hearing and the images that we're seeing, but the frequencies that we're surrounded by. Because frequency, like cymatics, which is the impact of energy and frequency on matter, matters. It matters so deeply. And I go deep into this in the Sovereign Wealth Keys. It's a big part of why I have the Daily Sovereign, so that you learn how to speak to yourself differently. It's why I wrote The Witness, so again, you can reflect and learn how you're speaking to yourself. And then in turn, how you speak to the world. It's so important. And it's so deep and convoluted, and people short circuit when I talk about it, which is why I'm just interested in having these conversations to whoever chooses to show up and engage with them, and not chase the people that can't hear me. And I'll leave you with something interesting. When I talk about cymatics, like one of the most fascinating people is Dr. I'm not even going to attempt his first name, Dr. Emoto, Emoto. And he was a Japanese scientist who was testing the impact of sound on water, and specifically like the shape of the snowflakes that it would create. And it's so fascinating to look at the frequency of the words, whether they were spoken with grief or anger or sadness or vitriol, versus things that came from peace and joy and love, and the actual shape of the snowflake it would produce. That's where we start getting into solfeggio tones and the frequency of hertz and what actually mimics nature versus what distorts it. And when you Google cymatics and you throw it into YouTube, you'll start seeing some really interesting videos on how different hertz will create, like they'll put sand on a speaker and you start seeing it go into like really wacky patterns, but then certain frequencies will show you like sacred geometry and very um, intricate patterns that mimic nature. There's actually a video that I'll post in the show notes, and it's on sound healing. I use sound healing to heal my body. It's what I used for healing burnout, and it's a session that they did. I think it's in the UK. I'm not sure, but they did a blood draw. They did a blood draw on like 6 people that were sitting in a room, and they put all of their blood immediately under a microscope. And you were looking at the cells, and you could see how many of these cells were completely clumped together. They were tight. There wasn't a lot of activity happening. And then they went through a 20-minute gong bath and then did an immediate cell draw after. And the vibrancy of the cells in the blood work was shocking to the people in the room. The vitality that appeared in the second blood draw versus the first after only 20 minutes of an appropriately tuned solfeggio frequency changed the structure of their blood, which ultimately changes the structure of your physical vitality. It's absolutely fascinating to me. But the first frequency we have to deal with is the frequency of our thoughts, which is the language that we use to speak to ourselves. Thoughts become things, words become your world. That becomes the actions that you put into the world. It all matters. So I've gone on a little bit of a tangent, but all this to say, today, July 7th, 2026, there's something wild. There is something wild happening in the Halifax Regional Municipality. And I know it's happening everywhere, that we're all under these stressors, and Halifax is my microcosm that I'm living in and that I'm highly engaged in. And it is just a symptom of a greater root issue. That greater root issue not being conspiracy theories, not being governments. It's a symptom of how we as individuals are choosing to show up in our lives every day, how we are choosing to govern ourselves, how we understand trust as a structure, and how we speak to ourselves. And when we can start there and start to unpack that at the individual level, I promise you the ripple effect and how everything changes around us will be mind blowing. Absolutely mind blowing. So on that note, it is 10:07, only 7 minutes over, not bad. The lawnmower is just starting to come. So before he comes and makes a grand appearance, I'm going to bid you adieu. I hope you have a beautiful Tuesday. I will see you again, same time, same place next week. But definitely go into the show notes and look at the links that I've dropped there, because they matter. They're going to help add further context to the things that we discussed today. So anyway, thanks so much. See you later.